When it comes to learning how to downwind paddle and catching some of the funnest waves there are on the water, the learning curve can seem quite steep, especially if you're someone who only had experience paddling on flat water. So, in today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 mistakes to avoid making in order to give you a more enjoyable downwind learning experience. When it comes to learning any new stand-up paddleboard discipline, it's always better to start off using a wider, more stable paddleboard. The main reason for this is as you're learning new skills and techniques, you actually focus on applying those skills and techniques while using a stable paddleboard on the water. Because if you're using too narrow of a paddleboard, you're having to focus more of your attention and more of your brain power to simply stabilizing yourself on that paddleboard and not falling off, versus actually applying your brain power and focus and learning the new skills and applying the new skills while on the water. Then obviously later, as your skills and techniques progress, you can also move or transition to a narrower, more efficient paddleboard once you've already conquered the necessary techniques and skills in that paddling discipline. Now for myself, I unfortunately had to knowingly choose to make this mistake of using too narrow of a paddleboard to learn how to downwind paddle on. I actually had to use this race board behind me here, which is only 23 inches wide. So even though, yes, I'm very stable on this paddleboard in choppy conditions as well as flat water conditions, trying to learn new skills such as downwinding skills in very choppy conditions on the water on this very unstable race board was extremely challenging to do, and it's not something that I recommend to do at all. As you can see in my first few videos of my downwind series, I fell so many times because I was simply having such a hard time trying to stabilize myself on this race board while trying to apply and learn these new techniques of downwinding while on the water. So please take my advice. If you have the option to use a wider, more stable paddleboard to learn how to downwind on, choose to use that board over a narrow race board. That way you can actually learn to apply those skills while not falling off your paddleboard every few minutes while on the water. When it comes to trying to catch any wave on the water, whether you're doing surfing or downwind paddling, knowing when to paddle hard and when not to paddle hard will not only help you catch more waves, but also help you save more energy as well. So when it comes to downwind paddling, it really is all about timing. When you start to see the nose of your paddleboard dip down into the water in front of you and you feel the wave starting to push the paddleboard behind you, you now know it's time to start paddling hard for a few short strokes to get on top of that wave and start riding it. And then you start to ease up in your paddle strokes, conserving energy and riding that wave. Now you don't want to stop paddling completely, as you will start to stall off and fall off that wave. So you still want to keep some nice easy strokes going in the water to help you continue riding that wave for the downwind session. But once you do fall off that wave, once again, you start paddling at an easy pace again and waiting for that next wave to come up behind you again to push you. A big mistake a lot of beginner paddlers make, especially myself when it comes to downwind paddling, is paddling too hard for too long. You're not trying to go out there and trying to paddle hard, trying to catch all the waves or chasing down waves, but rather it's more of a patient game of waiting for the waves to come to you. So as you're waiting, you simply want to take nice, slow, easy paddle strokes in the water, waiting for that wave to come to you. Then once you feel that wave start to push you and the nose of your board start to go down the water a little bit, then you can paddle hard for a few short strokes, get on top of that wave once again, and then riding it. Now real quick before we do move on to this next tip, if you guys are enjoying these videos and you have not subscribed to the channel yet, I highly encourage you guys to do that. It's a free thing to do. It shows your support and allows me to work with more brands to create more content for you guys. As well, if you are interested in having sub coaching, and whether it's one-on-one coaching or in a team format, I highly encourage you guys to go check out my website as well, link down below, to check out my programs and my offerings to help you become a better paddler. So with all that being said, let's jump into our next tip. When it comes to downwind paddling, knowing where to stand on your paddleboard can make the difference of whether you catch more waves or less waves. Unlike flat water conditions where you tend to stand in one spot the entire time when you're doing your paddleboard session in the water, downwinding requires you to move quite a bit of your paddleboard throughout the entire session. But even when you're doing your paddleboarding on the downwind session and you're waiting for the next swell to come behind you, if you're not standing in the correct spot on your paddleboard waiting for that swell, will either cause you to miss that swell, to stall over the top of it, or for your nose to dive too far into the water, causing you to fall off your paddleboard also. So each paddleboard is going to be different in terms of where you stand on that paddleboard because it depends of where the volume displacement is on your paddleboard. For example, like this race board, there's a lot more volume in the nose of this board versus the tail of this board. But if you're on a more of a flat deck paddleboard, the volume will also be displaced differently on that paddleboard also. So with this advice, you are going to do some trial and error on your paddleboard while on the water to find that sweet spot of where you need to stand on the paddleboard while trying to catch swell in a downwind session. But here are some basic concepts. If you're standing too far back on your paddleboard, you're basically going to be putting the brakes on and stalling over all the waves. So as the wave comes behind you and starts to push your paddleboard, you basically have the brakes on, just fanning all the weight on your paddleboard too far backwards, causing your nose to be too high up. And as the wave starts to push you, you're simply going to have the brakes on, as I said, over and over again, and you're going to fall off the back of that wave. Likewise, if you're too far forward on your paddleboard, as a wave comes behind you, starts to push you, the nose of your board is just simply going to dive all the way into the water, and you have a high chance of simply just falling forward on your paddleboard or falling off into the water as your board does a nosedive in front of you. So the real idea is to find that sweet spot between the water pushing you from behind, your nose is not diving too far into the water as the swell comes up behind you or the wave comes up behind you, and then you simply get ready to paddle hard for a few strokes, move back into that surf stance we'll talk about here in a second to ride that wave. Now this next tip is probably the hardest part when it comes to learning how to downwind paddle, especially if you're someone who does not come from a surfing background. Because just like I talked about in the last tip, when you start trying to catch a wave or ride on a wave on the water, you now have to get back into a surf stance on your paddleboard. So it obviously requires you to move, but also move at a very fast pace at the right timing to ride that wave in a downwind session. Now for myself, even though I kind of knew these facts and knew how to get back into a surf stance, I found it very challenging to do it quickly and fastly enough while not falling off my paddleboard in the process of moving on my board trying to catch that wave. So with that, some of the best tips I can really give you is honestly doing it fastly, quickly, and efficiently. So the first two, obviously fast and quickly, are the same thing. I don't know why I said that, but doing it fastly and efficiently are really important things to do when it comes to downwinding. So as you start to feel that wave come behind your paddleboard and you know it's now time to take a few hard paddle strokes, you're starting to catch the wave, it's now time to quickly and efficiently get back into that surf stance on your paddleboard to start riding that wave in the water. Now once again, depending on your style of board you're riding on, will depend how far back you need to stand or how far forward, as well as you're in a windier day where there's bigger waves in the water. With a bigger wave, you will have to stand further back on your paddleboard as well, as there's more force pushing you in the water. But with smaller waves, you'll tend to stand closer towards the middle part as you're riding smaller waves with less force in the water. Now, one of the biggest mistakes I made at the very beginning when I'm trying to learn how to get into a surf stance in downwind conditions was I was tending to leave my front foot here still facing horizontally or in a straightforward stance on my paddleboard with only my back foot going into a sideways surf stance here. So when I was doing that, I was putting a lot of weight still on my front leg. Since that leg or foot was on one side of the center line of my paddleboard here, it was causing my board to really be tipsy as I was shifting weight in my feet in the water. So with that, when I put too much weight on my front foot, for example, more and more weight would go to that side of the paddleboard and bloop, off into the water I would go. So really the main goal is to have that front foot also turn sideways in that surf stance, giving you more control with your feet and moving weight over your feet to control your balance better on the paddleboard while riding that wave. Because you not only control it forward and backwards, but you can also control it sideways as you're in that surf stance while in the water. So that's a really key important factor to consider to make sure that you do when you get back to that surf stance, to have both feet sideways in that surf stance, riding that wave, controlling your balance while in the water. Now obviously with those who have more skill, they can have a lot more technique while moving on their paddleboard, whether they cross their feet. But for myself, I find it more fast and more efficiently to do to simply quickly get back, jump back, and start paddling and riding that wave. So in my personal opinion, there's nothing more frustrating to fall off your paddleboard only to fall it once again, as you're simply trying to get back on the stupid thing after you fell off the first time. When it comes to paddling in downwind conditions, when there's a ton of movement on the water, this can happen quite often and can become incredibly frustrating when all you're trying to do is simply get back on your board, keep paddling, and you can't even do just that. So one of the best ways I've found to get back on your paddleboard if you do fall off in the water, to avoid falling off it once again, is once you swim up to the paddleboard, you want to make sure the nose of your board is facing downwind. That's kind of the first thing you want to do. Because of the nose of your board, or your board is faced sideways where the waves are coming on this side or on the other side of you, that creates a lot of movement side to side on your board. So as you go to get back on top of it, you're now having to work against those waves side to sideways, and it's very easy to fall off once again with the side waves hitting the side of your board. So rather, make sure the nose of your board is facing downwind to help you avoid having to work against the side chop from the downwind waves in the water. Once the nose of your board is now facing downwind, you swim up to your paddle board. Then I like to place my paddle in my hand and grab the opposite side rail here to make sure my paddle board or my paddle is not in my way when I climb back on top of my paddle board. Once my paddle is there, I then grab the sides of my board here and I climb back up on my stomach towards the back end of my board here because it's a dugout and it's easier on this back side where the railings are smaller. So I climb up towards the back of my board here on my stomach. I don't get back on my knees right away because that creates less stability once again as my center of gravity is higher up. So I climb back onto my stomach. I then slide forward on my stomach towards the center of my board where it's more stable because it's the wider part of the board. And I then slowly come back up to my knees. Once again, moving towards the center, stable part of my paddleboard once again. Then once I'm here and I'm feeling stable, I slowly start to stand up once again. My paddleboard here, getting my board, my paddle in the water as quickly as possible, as that's going to provide me more balance once again while paddling on the water. So even though that sounds like a very simple thing to do, I guarantee it'll make a big difference in helping you stay on your paddleboard as you're getting back on top of it, rather than falling off it over and over again, becoming increasingly frustrated with that process. So I hope that you guys enjoyed those 5 simple beginner downwind tips today. And if you have more tips you want to share with the paddling community, I encourage you guys to write those down in the comments down below, as I would also love to read about them. That's it for today's video though. I'll catch you guys in the next one.